Welcome back to Baba Recaps. Today I will show you a drama, thriller film from 2023, titled Black Lotus. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. A retired Special Forces soldier confronts his dark past, battling ruthless criminals to rescue a kidnapped girl, filled with intense fights, high-stakes chases, and shocking betrayals. The story begins at the National Opera House in Hamburg, Germany. A symphony orchestra is preparing for a practice session, unaware that a group of masked attackers is quietly infiltrating their space. Since the musicians are oblivious to the impending threat, the intruders disperse. The conductor arrives, and the practice session commences as normal. Not long after, the intruders storm in and begin firing into the air. At the same time, John and his rescue team have already been dispatched to the location. He issues his last instructions to the team, just as the intruders activate their live broadcast, declaring their takeover of the opera house, and their demand for a $300 million ransom. John advises his team to remain silent until he signals them to act, but the leader of the group captures a woman, and executes her instantly. This act compels Matto to disobey John's orders and retaliate against the intruders. John swiftly directs the other teams to counter the attack, and within moments, his team is successfully neutralizing the majority of the intruders in a brutal battle. After the chaos has died down, John faces Matto for not following orders. However, it's evident that Matto has been shot, and the situation looks grim. At that moment, a criminal posing as a captive suddenly comes to life. Matto manages to eliminate him, but in a heartbreaking turn of events, John is fatally wounded. Matteo's quick choice ends up costing John his life. Years later, we discover that Matto is living in Romania, having retired from the Special Forces, and now working in a rural area known as a sawmill. Despite having moved on from his previous life, the memory of John's death continues to torment him. Matto looks at a picture and is flooded with memories of the happy times he shared with John's family. On his salary day, he decides to retire for good, purchases a ticket to Bucharest, and prepares to depart. Simultaneously in Amsterdam, an Interpol squad led by Shira manages to intercept a drug delivery, severely impacting several mafia groups. A gang leader informs Sabin, the cartel's leader, that the drugs have been confiscated by Interpol. It's later revealed that one of the prisoners is an undercover Interpol agent, who played a crucial role in the operation. Shira informs the agent that they must intensify their efforts to capture the mafia's top leaders. Upon Matto's arrival in Amsterdam, we encounter Paul, a businessman deeply involved in the cryptocurrency market. Simultaneously, Matto is standing anxiously at Helen's doorstep. After a brief pause, he knocks. To his surprise, it's Helen's daughter Angie who greets him. Matto requests that she bring her mother inside. Upon Helen's arrival, she is taken aback by his presence. She offers him coffee, though it's evident she's still trying to make sense of his unexpected return. Once inside, Matto discovers that Helen is now married to Paul. The atmosphere becomes strained as Helen confronts Matto, accusing him of not attending John's funeral. Despite their close bond, Matto, visibly weighed down, offers his apologies and confesses that he feels responsible for John's passing. He attempts to share the details of what occurred, but Helen remains unresponsive. She's enraged, disturbed by his return after years, bringing up memories she's been trying to leave behind. After a tense exchange of apologies, Matto departs, but Helen catches sight of him outside, looking defeated. This sight fills her with guilt, prompting her to offer him the guest room as a temporary place to stay until he sorts out his future. Matto agrees. Later, Helen presents Matto with some of John's old possessions she had kept for no particular reason, suggesting that Matto should have them. At the same time, Sabin discusses their present circumstances and the prior incident of cargo theft. It's during this discussion that Sabin and his team suspect the presence of a traitor among them. At home, Paul observes Matto and Angie together. Helen informs him that Matto was a friend of John's and will be staying with them for a period. In the evening, Matto is found sitting outside, deep in contemplation. He thinks back to his days with John in Afghanistan during a joint mission. They had conversations about their families, and John revealed that Helen was expecting a child. Angie expresses her growing affection for Matto to her mother. Paul is eager to talk to him, and Matto tells him that there's always a cause worth fighting for. Paul notes that Matto appears emotionally wounded, but Helen comforts him, stating that he doesn't need to be concerned. Matto and John have shared numerous hardships together. The following day, Matto receives a note from Angie requesting his presence before he leaves. Consequently, he decides to go for a run. On his return, he notices Helen and Angie preparing to go to school. Helen asks Matto if he could look after her dog while she's at her job. Meanwhile, Sabin arrives to question Paul about the missing $15 million from his account. Paul attempts to clarify that the world of cryptocurrency is currently facing difficulties, but remains hopeful for a resolution. However, Sabin appears doubtful. He gazes at a family photo, sternly reminding Paul of the urgency to resolve their current predicament. As Sabin departs, it's evident that Interpol's covert operatives are following him. Upon entering their vehicle, is discreetly observing them. He's attempting to capture a photo on his phone, completely engrossed in his task, oblivious to the fact that he's being shadowed as well. Overwhelmed, Matto spends the day tackling work before Helen suggests they go for a hike. He decides to distract himself by constructing a treehouse for Angie, aiming to occupy his thoughts. Later, Paul returns home, visibly distressed, and Helen inquires about his troubles. He only mentions having accounting problems, not disclosing any details about Sabin. Meanwhile, a group of tourists on a boat come across a shocking discovery: a body suspended from a bridge. It turns out the murder was committed by one of Sabin's operatives, who learned the victim was cooperating with Interpol and decided to eliminate him. Upon their arrival, Shira and her partner recognize the victim as one of their informants. In his office, Paul is glued to the television, watching reports on a recent cryptocurrency crash. At that moment, Paul receives a call from Sabin demanding his money back, with the ultimatum being that he had only a day to comply. Paul vows to rectify the situation, but Sabin doesn't even raise his voice. He simply instructs his men to handle it. Meanwhile, Shira and her partner realize that the attackers are trying to communicate with them through the men, but their phone's facial recognition system is too damaged to unlock. Angie playfully taunts Matto about his scar, giving him a tight hug, while Helen observes the growing connection between them. It's a night for family pizza, but Paul informs them he can't join due to pressing business matters, as they enjoy their pizza outdoors. Angie presents Matteo with a sketch, and Helen encourages him to stay longer for Angie's sake. She mentions how John would have been delighted to see them so close. Just as they begin to see some hope, the situation spirals out of control. Suddenly, 4 men wearing masks and wielding baseball bats attack Matto. Angie, not for her own safety but to shield Matteo, runs. One of the attackers aims for her, but she swiftly retaliates. The attack on Matto was merely a diversion. As Helen and Matto are left battered on the ground, one of the attackers snatches Angie and tosses her into a car. Matto rises and snatches a bicycle, racing after the kidnappers. Helen uses a borrowed phone to contact Paul, informing him that Angie has been abducted. Instantly, he understands the situation and attempts to reach out to Sabin for assistance, but Sabin abruptly ends the call. Matto continues to pursue the vehicle, eventually succeeding in boarding another one and confronting the criminals within. However, upon entering, he discovers Angie is missing, leading the pursuit until they come to a halt. Matto finds himself in the hospital, bound to the bed. Helen is outside yelling at a police officer, and Angie remains unaccounted for. Shira and her partner assume control of the investigation. The absence of concrete evidence leads to Matto's eventual release. Shira inquires about his strategy and he reveals his plan to save Angie. She learns about Sabin and the other gangs possibly linked to the case. Their investigation suggests the kidnapping is personal. Yet Paul's silence when questioned by Helen, and Paul raises suspicions. Shira gives Matto her contact information, and after everyone departs, she and her partner attempt to uncover Sabin's role in the kidnapping. During this time, Angie is detained at Sabin's establishment. He discovers that Matto has been discharged from the hospital. He informs Angie that she will soon return home, but his instructions to his men are to consider selling her to a global criminal organization. Matto contemplates the sketch Angie provided him, and recalls the moment John requested him to be Angie's godfather. He begins to assemble the necessary equipment for her rescue. Upon Paul's arrival to alert him, he inadvertently discloses Sabin's ties to the Ties family. Realizing Paul is aware of more than he admits, Matto confronts him. Where is he? Revealing the truth, Paul confesses to stealing $15 million from Sabin. After reclaiming John's firearm from Paul, Matto coerces him into contacting Sabin, feigning possession of the funds. They agree to swap Angie for the money. Sabin consents, and they decide on a rendezvous at a construction site. Before departing, Matto promises Helen he will return Angie. At the same time, Shira and Interpol suspect Paul of concealing something. She instructs her partner to monitor Paul's residence. However, shortly after, Matto attacks the agent, seizing his vehicle and escaping. Helen offers the agent a seat for coffee, and initiates a conversation with Paul to resolve their issues. Paul, now realizing Matto's collaboration with Interpol, starts to feel anxious. Matto arrives at the construction site for the exchange, where he faces a gang of criminals. He requests they return Angie. But they are taken back to learn Angie is not with them. The entire scheme was merely a ploy to recover the money. They forcefully take Maddo's belongings only to discover a bomb concealed in his bag. The detonation wounds several of the criminals, causing the rest to flee. Meanwhile, at the residence, Helen faces off against one of Sabin's henchmen. A short altercation erupts and the Ascent repeatedly attacks Helen with a knife, before she manages to frighten him away with a shot. Maddo handcuffs one of the injured attackers and interrogates him for whereabouts, but initially the individual refuses to cooperate. Eventually he confesses and reveals the hideout's location. Helen tends to the injured Interpol officer, but when they seek assistance from Paul, he dismisses them and makes his way to his vehicle. Yet one of Sabin's operatives had been waiting for him and stabs him before he could escape. Shira arrives just as the attackers escape. She sits with her partner in the vehicle attempting to soothe him. Maddo contacts Shira instructing her to assemble a team for Angie's rescue. Meanwhile, Sabin becomes increasingly worried, not receiving any updates from his men. He sits with Angie and inquires about her well-being. Maddo reaches the club, where he engages in a shootout with the security personnel attempting to apprehend him. Upon Shira's arrival with her team, they join the conflict, and the situation quickly intensifies, as Maddo and Shira eliminate the remaining attackers. Sabin opts to escape with Angie. However, he leaves a portion of his men to obstruct Maddo's progress. A fierce battle commences when Maddo and Shira face off with the remaining attackers, suffering significant casualty. Sabin continues to flee with Angie as the battle continues. Maddo chooses to pursue them by himself. Upon catching up, Sabin cautions him to stay back or he'll take out Angie. In a moment of quick thinking, Maddo lobs a knife directly at Sabin's heart. Despite Sabin's attempt to shoot, Maddo miraculously makes it out alive and Angie rushes to his side. 6 months down the line, Angie and Helen are in a relationship, still uncertain about Maddo's fate. At the same time, Maddo is back out at sea as Shira's partner is honored with an honorary medal. Shira comes over reminding him that their mission is far from over. The movie concludes here.